Keith Slater played 167 games for Swan Districts and 52 games for Subiaco. It seems Keith did things in threes. He played in 3 Swan Districts premiership teams, 1961, 62 and 63. 3 times he was their best and fairest, and 3 times he finished 3rd in the Sandover medal. Now in 1964, Keith joined Subiaco as their captain coach. The Maroons finished 4th in his very first season. Keith Slater was a stalwart of state football. He captained the state on numerous occasions and was a member of WA's famous 1961 Carnival team up in Brisbane. But Keith was much more than a great footballer. He was a gifted all-rounder, completing a rare double by representing Australia in Test cricket. Keith, which was your first love, cricket or footy?
I'd have to say cricket, Dennis, but I love my football. I put a lot more into my cricket than I did into my football, but had things panned out a little differently in 1958, then I might have had to give the football a miss. And I tried to give football away twice in favour of cricket, but the temptation was there. And I've got to say that at the end of my career, I think I loved them both.
So had you become a regular in the Australian cricket team, that would have rewritten the history books in WA footy.
Well, it could have.
The early 60s?
A little bit happened, didn't it? From 58 onwards, and because when we look at 1961 through to 63, and in 61 they thought that we jagged the premiership against East Perth, and maybe we were a little lucky to win it, but as I said to Polly, we won the next 2 also, so we weren't a bad side. Well,
tell me about 61. How unexpected was that?
Well, Hayden Bunton thought we could only beat East Perth once during the year, and we hadn't beaten them all season, but the second semi-final we'd worked a few things out where we thought that Polly was the key. Obviously he was, and we had to do things a bit differently. And we did. Between us, Fred, myself and Bunt, we worked things out, that a plan that we thought we could beat Polly with. But we just tried it a couple of times in the second semi when we got beaten by 10 goals. And we put all our eggs in the one basket. And in the grand final, then it was time to go for our shots, and it paid off. OK, well, they came last in 1960. They'd had, what, 6 coaches in the space of 4 seasons, Swans, and suddenly they're premiers. Remarkable, really. Well, you see, we were classed as a young side, Dennis, but we were all about 25, 26 years of age at that stage. So on football ages, we weren't a young side. We were young as far as success and finals were concerned, but we'd all played a fair bit of footy together at that stage, and it just needed someone like Bunton to come in with a plan. We were ready to follow someone with a plan, and he had the plan, he had the footballers, an injection of himself and Walker and Max Kelleher in the middle, and the rest were people that had been there for 5 or 6 years. OK, so what was the plan? Handball suddenly became an offensive weapon. Well, Bunton was very keen on that. In fact, if I can go right back to the 1950s, I can remember when Eric Strauss took over from Don Scott, and his pre-match address in one game was that I was the most selfish footballer that he'd ever seen. And his whole address before the game this day was about me being a selfish footballer. Now, at that stage, I was a great believer that if you took a mark, you had to get it on quickly to get it down to the full forward before it became all cluttered up. And on occasions, I would take a mark and I would handball to one of our rovers, and it would hit him in the back of the head, because the coach would nearly jump out of his box, because it wasn't done in those days. But when I think back on that, you know, I was proved correct, wasn't I? Absolutely. Yeah. A man ahead of your time. But with the farmians, see, Polly used to like to know where you were, where his opposing ruckman was, and he liked to come and jump into you. That was his plan. He would jump in, catch it in his right hand, and send a 30-metre handball to a roundabout centre-half forward where Paul Seal or someone like that would be streamed through. Yeah. So our plan was to get behind Polly where he couldn't see you. And then as the umpire went to bounce the ball, that was almost the starting pistol. And then you would go quickly to the front of Polly. Polly would always look around to see where you were just before the umpire bounced the ball. And as he looked around, you went past him, propped, and then went in, and Bunton just wanted it down under the veranda, as the saying goes. And that happened, and we got a lot of balls away from the centre, and especially early in the game when it was vital that we got them away. Now, you're talking about players being ready. Some great players in that team: Bagley, Castledine, Lawson, Nesbitt, Turnbull, Littrick. Billy Walker, of course, you've mentioned him. I mean, outstanding players. Could another coach have got similar results, or was it about Bunton? They weren't stars in 61, they became stars from 61 onwards, and they were, I mean, Billy Walker was an outstanding footballer. I mean, he kicked 60-odd goals for the season, was our leading goal kicker, And as you know, Dennis, if you get the ball in the forward line a lot and you don't kick goals, I mean, you don't win games.
He spent a fair bit of time there, didn't he? Because Hayden didn't come off the ball all that much.
Ever.
Billy got 5 in the grand final, didn't he, when you won your Simpson medal?
Yes, but he never went off the ball at all, Bunton. If Walker went on the ball, Bunton stayed on. And that happened in the grand final. He brought Walker onto the ball, but he stayed on the ball also. And that sort of gave us a bit more impetus again. But those players became very great players. Joe Lawson played an absolutely magnificent game in the grand final. I think Ken Bagley took 10 marks in the first quarter. And I thought I was very lucky to win the Simpson medal because we had some outstanding performers. I think it was the fact that my immediate opponent was Polly.
I was going to say, how satisfying was that, given that he was regarded generally as one of the best, I suppose at that stage, few ruckmen in Australia. He hadn't gone to Melbourne and proven himself, but still he was regarded very highly, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. I mean, every Victorian club was chasing Polly Farmer, and it was very gratifying. And the longer the game went, the better I got because my confidence rose. You know, I don't know how many marks I took in that game, but it was double figures, I think. And if you apply that to today's football, that's a lot of marks.
But you must have been in rare form at the time because looking back at the records, you were Swan's best player in the second semi, which set it up, I suppose, for the grand final. It wasn't completely unexpected. I look at the records for the preliminary final, when you won again and you were the best player or second best player, depending on who you listened to. Bunton played well that day. And come the grand final, there you were the Simpson medalist. I suppose looking back on your career, did you have a better month in football, do you think?
That's the most significant part of my life, winning the grand final in 1961. That was quite incredible. But it's funny, but I've been doing some of these interviews like you're doing now, Dennis, which has me going through the record books.
Isn't it great fun to sort of go back and have a look?
It is great fun,
yeah.
and one of the things I noticed, I was always best player against East Perth. Now, you say I was best player in the second semi-final. I didn't win many knocks from Polly, but I was pretty mobile. I made sure I was going to make a contribution to the team, and he wasn't a great picker-upper of his opponent. So I got a lot of the ball without winning a lot of knocks. But on the one-on-one contest in the second semi-final, he would have won hands down.
So coming out of the second semi, how did you rate your chances of beating them if you got another crack? And you had Subiaco standing between you and the grand final. Now, my recollection is that Subiaco led you by 21 points at three-quarter time, so to get that second crack, you were pretty lucky.
We fell over the line.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to the Subiaco people, as I did when I went there in 1964,
yeah,
they still talk about Billy Walker picking the ball up when it was out of bounds, and everybody had conceded it was out of bounds.
Right.
He just ran from the boundary right into the square and kicked the goal, which was counted, and which was a vital goal as it turned out. I mean, Subiaco, they were very unlucky not to win that game. But in the second semi-final, I got a rib full of Polly. And on the Thursday before the grand final, I couldn't breathe. And I thought it was just nerves. But then when it went on and I was finding it very hard to breathe, I had to go into the change rooms and they diagnosed a cracked rib.
Anyone that's had one of those, they're very painful, aren't they?
Well, they're hard. It's hard to breathe. I mean, that's the big problem. And I knew there was something wrong and I was thinking maybe it was nerves, but... And then that's when I learned about cortisone.
Ah.
Have you ever had a 4-inch long cortisone needle into your chest?
No, not in my chest, no. That's too late now, I think.
As they thread it between the bones and again at half-time.
Yeah.
So I might have been on drugs, Dennis.
The desired result was achieved anyway, Spud. I mean, at that stage, we're talking 61. You'd been there for, what, 5 years? You went down to Swans in 54. Frank Sparrow was the coach at that time. They would have been some tough times. We talked about the turnover in coaches at Swan Districts then, so that was all part of the learning curve towards 61?
I think we learnt off all the coaches. I mean, Frank Sparrow was a very good coach in his own right, but we weren't quite ready when he was there. We had Don Scott from West Perth, terrific guy, but never quite had the toughness that we needed. Eric Strauss took over. Now he's a physical education instructor. And he trained the pants off us. I mean, he really trained us very hard, Eric Strauss. And he got us very, very fit. And then we had Charlie Doig. Now, Charlie Doig, we finished last after Charlie Doig, but he was a great skills coach. He taught us a lot of skills. He improved us as our skill level as footballers. And I always thought he played his part in our success after 1960, because even though I think we only won about 2 games in 1960, we were skillfully better footballers than we were before he came.
Now, 59, you didn't play football for Swans. You played what? Cricket in England?
Lancashire League cricket for Haywood. And Percy Johnson's never forgiven me because he came to Swans and ran into all sorts of trouble. And I think Percy may have succeeded at Swans because he had a very big following. And he was sacked for off-the-field activities. And a lot of players left the club because of that.
Right.
And they weren't happy with his sacking, and they had a players' meeting and wanted him reinstated, but it never happened. So I felt a little bit sorry for Perce, but I missed all that, so I can't really comment on it.
So you've got this cricket and football running side by side. End of 1960, Bunton's been appointed, and you ran into him in an Adelaide street.
I did. I was playing cricket in Adelaide, and
you gave him the bad news.
Well, he made a point of coming up to introduce himself, and I said, well, I won't be playing football because I'd been to New Zealand and I'd had a pretty good tour of New Zealand with the Australian second 11. And when I arrived back, Benno was at the airport to greet the team, and he greeted me particularly and said he thought I'd done very well in New Zealand and I was exactly the type of bowler they were going to need in England, so keep my head down, and so that was good enough for me. I'd marked myself in for England in 1961, and when I ran into Bunton in the street in Adelaide, he was all enthusiastic about coming over to coach Swans, and I said, well, you know, I wish you luck, but I won't be there. And he didn't take too kindly to that. He didn't get off on a very good footing, Dennis.
Well, it's an interesting situation because, I mean, we're not talking a lot of football here. You didn't play a lot of football as a teenager, did you?
I played in the Cobbers and the Temperance League. I didn't play any football at school. There was no. I was a terrific yard footballer. You know, where you get behind the pack and wait, knew who could kick them and who couldn't kick them. And
take the big hang.
Yeah, I could take the big hang, yeah. But I don't remember playing any football at all at primary school until I went to Midland High School, and then I played for Midland High School. But I grew 5 inches in 1 year. And where I was a little half-forward flanker come full forward at Midland High School, I didn't play any football from 16 to 20. And then when I was 20, I was a bit scared to play Metropolitan Juniors. It was like a league competition, you know, Terry Dyson and all those guys. They were big, whopping guys, and I wasn't that keen. I was like a, you know, like a spider, they used to call me. But I'd grown 5 inches, so I was up to 6'3" all of a sudden. And Bobby Gartrell, who was a friend of mine, came around on the Saturday morning. I think I was getting ready to go to the races. And he said, what about having a game of football for Midland Amateurs? He said, we've got 14 players today. We're playing the topside Maylands at Shern Park, and we've got 14 players, including property men and trainers. And I thought, oh, that's not a bad idea. I said, I'll have to find some boots. And I went down to Shern Park, and I was the only tall guy on the side, so I played as a ruckman. And we finished up with 16 players. We played Harvey Kirk's Maylands Amateurs, and we got beaten by 6 goals. And I remember they had a guy there who was... I forget his nickname, but he wasn't a very nice guy, and he was going to do all sorts of things to me. But we had Butch Ellery, who was about a 20-stone guy who could run 100 inside evens. All right. Oh, Squeaker was this guy's name, that's right. And someone said, he went up to Squeaker and said, if you lay a hand on him, you've got to deal with me. And he said, and I can catch you. So that was a good... Anyway, at the end of the game, to cut a long story short, we're walking off the field, and the umpire said, I don't often do this, son, but he said, I gave you the best man on the ground today. So 4 games later, I was in the state amateur side that beat South Australia at East Fremantle Oval by 25 goals. And then I was invited down to Swans, and so it all changed. In about 4 or 5 weeks, my whole life changed.
But you had that big void in there, not a lot of football. I mean, that's quite remarkable. If you look at today's footballers and generally their career paths, it doesn't work like that anymore. Not necessarily a good or bad thing.
No. Well, I was 20 when I started at Swans. And Frank Sparrow was coach, and I mean, I was invited down, so I was immediately invited into the league squad. I played 3 or 4 games of reserves in 1954. I was in national service at that stage, so I was suffering with the needles we used to have and all sorts of things. And in the start of 55 season, I thought I was a certainty be in the league side, and I missed out on the first game.
Okay.
And that was a bit of a setback to my ego, because I thought I would be in the game. But a guy named Brinkworth was picked before me, and he broke his leg in that game, unfortunately. He never played again. So I played against East Perth in the second game of the season. Okay.
Well, let's work back to that hat-trick of premiership, 62 and 63. You beat East Fremantle in both of those games. They had a couple of handy big men too, obviously, Jack Clark and Bob Johnson. There was a lot of good big players going around in that era. Brian Foley's another one.
Well, East Fremantle had Jack Clark and Percy Johnson and Bob Johnson, thankfully, didn't come onto the ball too often, and a guy named Laurie Nugent, who I rated a bit.
Yep.
And yeah, we had a good time against East Fremantle. I mean, I can remember in 1962 we kicked into. They won the toss and we kicked into the breeze in the first quarter, and we kicked 6 goals. And in the grand final, they won the toss and let us kick with the breeze. We kicked another 6 goals, and on each occasion, the game was really over at quarter time.
I saw a lot of those matches going back to the 60s. Bassendean, East Fremantle, WAFL, didn't matter much. And you did have their measure. Was that a confidence born out of 1961? You were clearly a better side than East Fremantle. There was a gap between Swan Districts and what came next, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. I thought 62, we should have gone through undefeated. That's how good we were and how much better we were than any other side. But we had our lapses, and I think we lost 6 or 7 games, but I don't think we should. I remember one game against Subiaco, and this gives you a bit of an idea of the Bunton. I was never sure whether he was a con man or a psychologist. There's not much difference, I don't think, Dennis, but I can remember one game against Subiaco at Bassendean Oval, and they were something like 8 goals in front of us at half-time. And he used to talk right through half-time, Bunton. And when we came into the room, he said, do what you got to do and get in the property room. Now, the property room wouldn't hold more than 20, 22 players, so we crammed in there, and for the whole of half-time we sat in there. No one said a word. We're all sort of looking at each other and wondering who you was going to get stuck into. And next thing we heard the umpires blowing their whistles in the room, trying to get us out on the ground, so time was up. And the Bunt put his head around the corner and said, right, let's go. And we were 2 goals in front at 3/4 time. I mean, this is the type of psychology he embarked on. And
not a bad side to coach, I've got to say. Again, going back to those names and as they matured. I mean, from your point of view, you spent more time on the ball, I think, than, say, Cyril did, Cyril Littrick. He spent a lot of time in the forward pocket, as I recall, kicking goals. He was very good at that.
The best forward pocket ruckman I think I've ever seen, apart from Bob Johnson, maybe, who I thought was quite outstanding.
And you had this contrast in Rovers. You had Billy and you had Hayden Bunton. How do you see them looking back? Their strengths and their weaknesses. I guess they didn't have too many in the case of Billy in particular.
No,
he didn't have too many weaknesses.
Billy was very much a rover. Full stop. I remember in the 66 carnival they played him on a wing and he was like a fish out of water. But, I mean, he was marvellous at getting away with the ball. He is the strongest rover I think I've ever seen. And I learned how strong he was when I played with Subiaco, because you would come in to tackle Billy, and once he put his hand on your chest and just rebounded off you, it was just a real show of strength. So he was very strong. Bunt was, well, he was super courageous. I mean, he never took his eye off the ball. And he was a wonderful rover to knock the ball to. I mean, if I had to say the 2 best guys to knock the ball to on our side were Bunt and Brian Gray. And if you got it within a metre of either side of them, then they would always get the ball. And when you're trying to decide who's the best out of Bunton and Walker, I mean, they were quite different.
Oh, absolutely. That's
if you had to sprint over 50 metres, Bunton would run last.
Very slow.
But from here to that camera, because he was so courageous, so determined, and his brain worked so quickly, I mean, he would get the ball every time. And you had the perfect combinations when I look back, because you had tough men, Castledine and Nisbet, to complement the big fellows like yourself and Cyril, and then the guys around the packs like Hayden and Billy Walker. So it really was a great chemistry, wasn't it? I mean, very few sides have gone close to that. And Fred Castledine and Tony Nisbet, but Fred Castledine was really tough. I mean, he copped a few himself, but he never said anything. But
he genuinely enjoyed it, I think, didn't he?
I think so, but he was wonderful to play with. I mean, there was occasions when I went to Fred and said, this number 11's drive me mad, Fred. He'd say, it's number 11. And I'd have a lot of confidence that that would be attended to.
Yeah.
And I don't think he ever got reported. But he was, I mean, he believed in the back line you destroyed the ball. He had the animal cunning also. You see, a lot of our footballers these days don't have animal cunning, and you can't coach animal cunning. But Fred had animal cunning, and we played East Perth. I'll give you an example. We played East Perth at Bassendean Oval one day. We devised a plan where whoever got to the boundary throw-in first would go and jostle with pole, and the other guy would come over the top. Fred never once got to the boundary line first. And at half-time he was clearly best on ground because he was coming from behind in the contest.
Right.
And he was starring. And I had to say to him at half-time, like, you're not getting to those boundaries.
So you were doing the hack work?
I was doing the hack work. Right. That's animal cunning.
Absolutely. Now, there was another tough nut I remember. He only stuck around for 1 year, Max Kelleher. Now, so you had him in the centre as well, so there was a fair bit of physical presence, you'd say, in the centre.
We'll talk about Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, he is quite a spoken person you would ever meet, Max Kelleher. on the field, he was absolutely ruthless. But he suited our side. And Bunton brought him across because he knew what he was like also. And he just stayed 1 year, Max Kelleher. But by then, the the die was set. And, I hope the guys I played with are not underrated as footballers. You know, the Turnbulls and the Castlelines and the Nesbitts and the Joe Lawson and Ken Bagley. I mean, they really were outstanding footballers.
And Bagley could play anywhere, couldn't he?
Well, he was an absolute star, wasn't he? And, North Melbourne, they just fell over backwards to try and get Ken Bagley's signature. And
he didn't want to go?
Didn't want to go. Just loved it here. And our standard of football in the 60s, Dennis, was pretty high.
Sure.
I mean, if you think of 1961, we beat the Vicks in Brisbane. In 63, they beat us here by 1 point. In 65, we beat them here by 9 points. And in 66, I mean, we were 5 goals in front, 10 minutes to go in the third quarter in Hobart. And, it was interesting what happened there, that we lost by a couple of goals, and we shouldn't have. So we were competing very favourably with Victoria, and bearing in mind that the Farmers and the Marshalls were playing for Victoria against us.
Yeah, I'll get back to that in a moment, the state footy, because I'm going to set that aside. That's another province that you excelled in. But, whoops, can't lose the notes, Spud. No. A lot of research has gone into these, I've got to say. Now, we're talking about change. How big a wrench was it to go from Swan Districts to captain coach of Subiaco in 1964?
Yes, I think there's people that haven't ever forgiven me at Swans because we'd won 3 in a row and we could have looked at 4 in a row. I was at a situation where I'd been married in 1959 and there was no money around and I needed some money. I mean, I came from fairly meagre beginnings. My father died when I was 3 months old, so I never had a father. And I needed to make a plus out of my sporting acumen. In fact, I remember my old mother saying to me, "You put too much time into sport, you'll never make a living out of sport." And in my time, she was right.
My mother said the same thing.
But I'd like to see her these days. But I had the offer from Subiaco 2 years before. It was when Charlie Tyson was, and Frank Axel rang me when I was playing cricket in Brisbane and said, "How would you like to coach Subiaco?" And I said, "I think Charlie Tyson is doing a superb job." He said, "Yeah, but we need a ruckman and you've been under Bunton." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to put my hat in the ring because I think you've got to stick with Charlie Tyson, but, let's leave the gate open." And at the end of 63, they became very keen and offered me the sort of money that I needed to build a house, buy a block and build a house. And it was simple as that. I mean, Swans could have matched that. And
when you say the sort of money, just how much money was that?
I got $1,000 for the season.
Dollars, not pounds.
Sorry, £1,000.
I'm not the tax man, you can tell
and
me.
I got £1,000 if we got into the 4.
Yeah.
And everything was doubled if we won the premiership.
Okay, so you got in the 4. You're in the first semi-final against Claremont, who came from that game, I think it was at Leederville Oval against West Perth, scrambled into the 4. You started red-hot favourites that day, but they beat you by 12 points and went on to win the premiership. Still a bit of memory?
I think I uttered my first word after that game at midnight. I mean, we hadn't toyed with Claremont that year, but we'd beaten them very easily every game that year, and we were a better side than Claremont. And in one game, I remember we gave them 10-goal start at three-quarter time and still beat them, and it rained. And that first semi-final, now you've been a coach, Dennis, and the players got this rain thing in their head. And everybody that would walk into the room, someone would say, "It's still raining?" And I sensed danger. So I said, "No one," but no one comes into the room. This is about 20 minutes before the game. I don't want anyone coming into the room. But I couldn't stop committeemen coming into the room. And because as soon as a committee man would come in, Bill Wernstead or whoever, some player would say, "It's still raining." So I got up with my address and I really got into them. I said, "Rain or no rain, we're playing in the first semi-final and it doesn't matter what the weather is." But it had a very decided effect on the way we played, and we were never going to win the game. We were 2 goals behind all day, and I think Kevin Clune snotted Wally Martin early in the game, and so we all chased Kevin Clune for a quarter to try and square him, and that's exactly what he wanted, and we made every mistake in the book, and then when Claremont went on and won the premiership, that really hurt a bit.
I bet it did. Now, did you enjoy your time coaching?
First year.
First year?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, first year I thought I coached well, and we developed into a very good football side, and we were getting the best out of most people. We never had a rover. Reg Hampson was a very talented footballer, but he was 10 minutes a quarter man, and we never really had a rover, and that was our weakness really. And at the end of that season, the committee came to me and said, we're reassessing the season and looking at next season, where do we go? And I said, just leave my lot alone. I had a gynaecologist and a fridge salesman as my co-selectors. And that suited me fine, because I like the rule of the roost.
The mind boggles, yeah.
So I said, just leave me alone and whatever else you've got to do. And anyway, I read in the next morning's paper that my selectors had gone.
Yeah.
And another selector had come in who I particularly said I didn't think I could work with, Les Cockle. Nothing against Les, but I didn't think I could work with him well. And I resigned.
After one season?
After one season.
Okay.
I resigned.
And they talked you back around?
Well, Arthur Williams, who was the registrar at the University of West Australia, rang me and said, Subi couldn't stand one more crisis. If you leave Subi now and there's another crisis, this club could fold. And I said, well, I'll stay on, but you've dented my enthusiasm. And there was immaturity on my part, Dennis. I mean, I was...
Les Cockrell stayed. You didn't get that overturned?
No, he stayed, and another selector came in. So I just felt really disappointed that they'd interfered with what I thought was a good thing. And then I did coach for the next 2 seasons. I played very well. I thought I played my best football at Subiaco almost, because I trained really hard. And I did pre-season, which I'd never done at Swans. And I went through the motions, really. I mean, I didn't live anywhere near Subiaco. I went there Tuesday and Thursday and played Saturday, and sometimes went there on a Sunday morning. You know, I went through the motions, but I didn't really coach. And if I had a regret in my life, it is that.
Okay.
Because I think I could have coached, and I didn't do my best for Subiaco.
Well, in '65, you lost a very important player too. Dennis Barron went to South Australia, didn't he?
Yes.
And Austin Robertson, I think, topped the goal kicking in that year. He was kicking goals for you. I mean, how good was Robertson? How did you rate him?
Well, the beauty of Austin Robertson is that he never missed a goal. He's the most magnificent kick I've ever seen. He used to kick drop punts when no one else did. And he could curve them whichever side of the goal he was on, through the goals. He was very fast. He could only play full forward.
Deceptively strong. You were talking about Billy before. I remember, I wasn't very strong, but I remember trying to tackle him one day at Leederville Oval. I was very surprised how strong he was.
Yep. Oh, yeah, he had a brilliant lead. He took a very good mark. But, I mean, at stages, we did a John Kennedy. We just cleared the forward line out, which he liked, and gave him a one-on-one situation. But that really was goal-kicking exercise, but it wasn't really winning a football game exercise. So he did like things his own way, but...
like most full forwards,
he was an outstanding full forward. They are different to other footballers, the good full forwards, aren't they? I think.
I think so. Going back to your first season at Subi, Barry Cable won the Sandover medal. You finished 3rd that year. Cable obviously was one of the major players on the footballing landscape during the latter years of your career. How did you rate him? Yeah,
he was an absolute champion. In fact, my memories are still when he and Walker would clash. I mean, he came to Perth in 1962, and the clashes, he was a wingman, and I knew he was going to be a champion, because we were playing at Lat Lane Park, and this little blonde-haired wingman had come down from Narrogin, and Harold Little was on the other wing, and Ern Henfrey was a very astute coach, and he picked a bit of an Achilles heel on our side. This is when we were a very good side, and they were driving us absolutely mad, Little and Barry Cable. And he was just getting a kick away at centre-half back this day, Barry Cable, and I was coming straight on at him. And I really should have stopped, because I was going to get there a bit late, and I thought, nah, I'm going to keep going here. And I did. And I flattened him after he just got the kick away. And I thought that might slow him down a little bit. And about 2 minutes later, I went into the pack after a ball on hands and knees, and next thing a boot hit me in the shoulder like it'd come out of the blue. And I grabbed the leg and looked up.
To find out who it belonged to.
Who it belonged to.
Yeah.
And I looked up, and it was Cable. He said, he's just come down from Narrogin.
Yeah.
He said, we're nearly square, aren't we?
That's something people don't realise, I think, about some of the great footballers. Farmer had that instinct too, didn't he? I mean, great footballers don't become great footballers by helping other people across the road.
Oh, I said he's got a chance, that kid.
Yeah, they've got something in them.
He knew how to stick up for himself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And went on to become a great state player, which was very much your forte, state football. I mean, you almost lived for that. I mean, we talked about the 60s and the premierships, but obviously state football was very high in your mind. You rated it very highly.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Never loved it in the first couple of years. And In 56 I played my first state game in the carnival. I started in league football in 55. 56 I was picked in the carnival side, but only played one game. That was against Victoria. And I'd never played anywhere other than forward line or ruck at this stage. And I started in the back pocket. My opponent was a guy named Gilmore. And next thing the ball was bounced and Roy Wright hit it out to someone and all our guys had peeled off and I'm standing in the square on Gilmore with 6 Vicks running towards me, one of them with the ball. And I hang back and make a last-minute dive. The ball goes over my head. Gilmore catches it on the line, kicks a goal. And because I'm right near the crowd, aren't I? What'd the crowd say? Get on your man, you bloody idiot. You know, I mean, that's... Yeah. But I did love state footy. Unfortunately, in 58, I was injured. I couldn't go to the centenary of football in Melbourne, but I went over. I was picked in the side, but I had a bad ankle. 61, I had a very bad ankle.
I was going to say, you started actually that big game against the Vicks on the bench, didn't you, because of injury?
Well, I shouldn't have played, really. I mean, I can remember getting a kick and it nearly killed me to kick the ball with my right foot, but I was pretty desperate to get a game and I'd missed the whole carnival. I kicked the ground. The Wollongabba ground in Brisbane was very hard, and I went for a 100-metre drop kick and kicked the ground. And I'd just come off a bad ankle injury. I think I'd only played 4 or 5 games leading up to that carnival. And so I was out for the series, but I trained well enough to get into the 20 for the final game against Victoria. And then I went on at the start of the last quarter, I went to centre-half forward, and Don Williams, who'd been centre-half forward, went to centre, and it was on. And it was, and I remember catching them at centre-half forward from Ray Gabelich. He just kept pounding. I mean, they were going through centre-half forward like a meteor, and I was latching onto them and giving them out to Don Williams.
Now Gabbo only played the one season at West Perth, that was it, wasn't it? Just the 1 year.
Yeah.
Played in that carnival team. And when you look at that carnival team, I mean, it must have been something to be part of because it really reads like a who's who of WA football of the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was.
What was the camaraderie like there? Because given the edge that existed around state football then too, the rivalry was high and keen and football was really on the incline. It was going towards its zenith, I suppose, towards the late 60s, but early in the 60s it was starting to gather momentum. What was the camaraderie like between all those players, those egos coming from the clubs?
Well, there were a lot of great footballers there, and it's not an accident they become great footballers. The turning point was Ray Gabelich. I mean, he went up there on a mission to get re-signed by Collingwood, and he'd abused himself a little bit when he was here. I mean, it was pretty common knowledge that he'd had too much to drink during the week.
Yeah, when you talk to West Perth people, I think that was the feeling, that he didn't really apply himself.
Correct, but when he went there, he wanted to be signed by Collingwood, so he never had a drink. He was the most dedicated footballer you've ever seen in your life. He trained for the carnival. He never had one drink that I saw while he was up in Brisbane. He started at centre-half back and was a powerhouse. In fact, I can remember 2 or 3 Victorian. He had an awkward kicking style, and he had to sort of steady up to get the kick away. And he would have sometimes 2 and 3 Victorians hanging onto him, trying to wrench him off the ball while he steadied up trying to get this kick away. But he was so focused and committed that they couldn't hold him. And they started a crowd poly. And they had a ruckman each side of poly, and they were just blanketing him out of it. So Sheedy, in his wisdom, put Gabelich onto the ball. And he was really fired up at this stage. And he started just coming in and hitting the ball with such ferocity, and it was clearing the square. It was always going into the forward line after he'd struck it. And that made a hell of a difference. And he put a few of the Vicks down too.
We were talking before about Jack Clark at half-time too.
Well, Jack Clark, you see, if I'd have played, Jack would have been in the back pocket. And because I didn't play, Jack was moved to the forward pocket, and it was a godsend. I mean, he was brilliant. I don't know how many goals he kicked, but he kept kicking goals from a forward pocket. He's a very talented footballer.
He could take a mark.
Take marks and a very good kick, and the fact that he was in a forward pocket was absolutely marvellous. And you know, it was just happening. We had tough guys. I mean, we had Atwell, and Bagley was just coming on the scene at that stage, and Dennis Barron. I mean, he was really tough in that carnival. And the umpires tended to let it go a bit, which meant that tough guys got away with a fair bit. And I mean, you know, it was just players going down left, right and centre. But it was a good win, but it did emphasise how strong West Australia football was.
Well, if 61 was a good win, 66, and you touched on it before, must have been bitter in Hobart when the Victorians were 5 goals behind at half-time. Then, what, we lost France and Bagley?
Yes, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, there was 3 things happened. You talk of 3s. There were 3 things that happened. John Nichols ran into Bagley, and it was totally, I mean, I was right there. It was accidental. He just was looking the other way and he had legs like lampposts. And he ran into Bagley and corked his leg.
It would have been accidental. It was accidental, though, wouldn't it?
Well, look, yeah, but he did cork his... And he'd been giving Billy Barrett a terrible time, Bagley. Bagley was playing centre. Now, Brian France had not give Baldock one touch of the football. Incredible performance. And I, to this day, don't know why he went off the field.
Really?
He literally went off the field and all of a sudden Mal Atwell had to take over at centre-half back. And, I mean, Baldock was an absolute champion. And because all of a sudden... and at the same time, Kevin Murray, Ted Whitten, King hit Kevin Murray. And he was told to do it, I've learned later on.
Oh, okay.
And he hit him with an open hand across the face. It was like a gunshot going off all over the ground. And Kevin, who'd been very composed for his whole time in West Australia, he just grabbed Whitten, took him up head high, and he was a big man, Whitten, threw him on the ground, jumped on top of him. Now, I could see what was going on. I was vice-captain and assistant coach to Kevin Murray at that stage. And I got Kevin round the neck and pulled him off and said, you know, don't lose it now, mate. We're 5 in front. And they kicked 5 goals in about the next 9 minutes.
That's unusual. I was going to say you're 5 in front, but a lot of people would say, so. We're talking now 2001. But 5 goals in 1966 probably equates to, what, 10 these days?
Oh, and they were arguing amongst themselves. I mean, I've never seen a Victorian side argue, genuinely, be criticising each other and really getting stuck into each other.
Yep.
And we had Cable, absolutely. I mean, Cable, I can remember Cable well. He won the Tassie medal in that carnival, but he was sensational. And he'd, at Perth, in those days, they never really had a ruck. I mean, that Paddy Stoney was about 6 foot tall. And,
that's right.
And he never knew. He used to just sort of rove the pack, and we had to convince him we were going to win some knocks. On the boundary throw-ins, for instance, when he said go, we wanted him to go. Because we were going to win the knock. We knew that we could beat Brown from Fitzroy and, you know, when Nichols wasn't on the ball. And he got the idea that when we said go, he could take off because the ball was going to come his way. And once he latched onto that, he was dynamite. But the whole side was just playing really well. Bagley was absolutely killing Barrett in the middle of the ground. The other thing that happened then was Ian Stewart went into the middle too. And he was a real class act.
A wonderful player, yeah.
He took complete charge. He and Baldock took charge, and we lost by a couple of goals.
Talking about the stature of WA football again, you talked about Kevin Murray there. I mean, it's interesting. Murray went back to Victoria and won his Brownlow medal.
Yes, he did.
That says something about the standard here, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was a wonderful person as well as a great footballer. I mean, he was. I worked with him very closely in Hobart, and he gave me the Rucks and Rovers. They were mine. Like on the training track and pre-game, I looked after the Rucks and Rovers, and he did the rest. And he never interfered at any stage. That was my baby, and we had a lot of coaches there. You know, we had. I mean, Kevin Murray was the captain coach of the side. We had Bob Johnson, Mal Atwell, and myself, all captain coaches of our respective clubs.
And you had a young emerging talent, I think, in that team as well, Mal Brown?
Malcolm Brown. I mean, that was a classic game against Tasmania. All the old guys were rested because we had to play Victoria on the Saturday. So the Wednesday we were playing Tassie and we expected to win. We had to win to stay in the competition. So the likes of Mal Atwell, myself and Bob Johnson were rested. And we were all on the bench. We were the brains trust, I suppose you'd call it.
The elder statesman, I think.
But we had to draw straws as to who would be the runner. One of us had to be runner. And guess who became runner?
You.
Bob Johnson.
Oh, the quickest man. The quickest man on the bench.
But we were in trouble at half-time.
Yeah.
And this fella McMahon had been giving Mal Brown a terrible time. He'd been giving Bagley a terrible time. In this game, Bagley was playing on a half-forward flank, and this McMahon, his name was, he was really punching hell out of bags and treading on him. And at half-time, Murray sent Mal Brown out to play on McMahon and just gave him his head.
Oh, dangerous.
And they went to bounce the ball at the start of the third quarter, and I think we might have been 11 points behind or something like that. And next thing, there was a hell of an uproar. And what's happened is he's trod on Mal Brown's foot. Mal Brown has hit him right in the face.
Now, Mal's about 20 at this stage,
Yeah,
isn't he?
he's just gone whack and clobbered this bloke. And as soon as he's hit him, he's grabbed his own face and writhed around like he'd been hit by McMahon. And all the one umpire had seen was that McMahon had been giving Bagley a bad time and mostly watching him. So Mal's hit McMahon, then grabbed his own face. The umpires rushed over, give Mal the ball. He's kicked the goal, and everything changed. And the crowd, it was in Hobart. Imagine what the crowd was saying.
Yeah.
Because they'd seen it all. So Mal delivered the punch and got the free kick.
Interesting player, Mal Brown. I talk to a lot of Victorians and we talk about great players. And I like to put him up there with the Brereton, and they just, you know, I mentioned Brereton and one or two other outstanding centre-half forwards, and their eyes just roll. I mean, they can't make that sort of association at all. But at his best, when he was about 19, 20, 21, in those few years, he was a marvellous talent.
Oh, yeah.
And it never was fully expressed, was it? It was a waste of talent and skill, I guess.
Yeah.
Did you feel that way?
Oh, yes, he was a very talented player, but he was good for a side. He was such a strong individual, Mal Brown, and he could win the ball, and you know, he was very astute with his hands. Oh no, he was a great player. He won a Sandover medal.
Oh yes, yeah, but it wasn't a long career, was it?
Oh, what? It was 14 or 15 games in Melbourne.
It was fragmented too. I mean, it was spread over a number of years, but there was only this sustained brilliance for about 2 or 3 seasons.
Yes.
And probably that carnival was when it was at its height.
Yeah. Well, he played his first game against Swan Districts, I remember, at Perth Oval.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're talking about some great players. You mentioned a lot of names there from the opposition. Who were, to your mind, the best players you played against from Victoria and South Australia?
Well, Nichols was the best ruckman I played against over there. Although in my first game I played against Roy Wright, and he was an absolute man-mountain. From a position point of view, John Schultz drove me mad. I've never known anyone pay close attention, and he was just an annoying bloke to play on, John Schultz. A really great player, but a great defender. And if ever he spoilt from behind, he always made sure he crunched your fingers as well as the ball. Right. And it used to hurt, you know. And I mean, they were great players. The best player I saw from over there was Ted Whitten. I mean, he was absolutely marvellous. I mean, he kicked both feet when not many players did. He handballed both hands when not many players did. He could ruck with ruckmen. He could rove with rovers. I mean, and he wore silk shorts.
Was that part of the problem? I look back at these state teams of the late 50s and early 60s. Now, we've talked about a couple of carnivals where we did well, but of course there were the drubbings at the MCG, and we had our problems with Victoria as well. Were some of those teams ill-conceived? Do you think they tried to get all the name players into the side instead of, as perhaps the Victorians did, picking positional players and running players? It seemed to me quite often we'd go in with 4 ruckmen, whereas the Victorians, I think by about 4 or 5 years ahead of us, went for ruck rovers.
Yes, yes, we often went in with Farmer, Clark and a rover, or that type of operation, but we couldn't handle the Melbourne Cricket Ground. See, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, Dennis, is quite different these days. When you played on the Melbourne Cricket Ground, it was like playing in a cricket pitch in the whole ground. Well,
I played there in 71, so it was no better then. Yeah.
Well, you know what I'm talking about. And I can remember I would invariably have a good quarter, first quarter, and when you got there, they would give you these sprigs. They were leather sprigs, and they'd build them up to about 1.5 inches high, so we wouldn't slip over. And I think picking them up out of the mud all day, but my legs were dead set like jelly at quarter time. You couldn't, I mean, you felt embarrassed. You couldn't run. Your legs were like jelly. And the only guy I saw play really consistently well was Derek Chadwick. And he used to play brilliantly, and maybe because we were playing so badly, but we could play about 1 quarter over there, and then you would get so tired in the legs. It was quite incredible, really.
You mentioned Chadwick. There were some players who really excelled in state football. Chadwick was one.
Yep.
Jack Clark was another, 4 times All-Australian. Ray Sorrell was another.
Marvellous state footballer.
He loved state footy, didn't he, Ray Sorrell? He could be out of form in local footy, put him in a state game. The only bloke I ever saw fix him up was a fellow called Withers from Tasmania. Remember that game in the rain?
Yes, I do.
At Subiaco Oval.
Didn't I make a smart move pulling out of that?
Yeah. Now, what year are we talking there? That would have been before you were coaching Subi. Because at the same weekend, Scray and Newton died in a traffic accident, didn't they, that day?
I don't know about the dates, but
I think it was. I think they went away simply because it was the state game.
Yeah.
And I think Hampson was due to go with them, and didn't because he was a last-minute inclusion in the state. So this is all deep history. But just talking about Sorrell, I mean, he was a wonderful state player.
Yes, he was. And I remember that wet day against Tasmania. That was unbelievable.
It did not stop raining, did it?
I was the runner that day, and I was captain of the side, but I had to pull out through an injury. And I agreed to be runner. No. It was mission impossible.
It did not stop
Everyone was
raining.
so wet, they weren't even interested in
well, I didn't see much of the game. I was in the front row and the outer, I remember, and it was just covering yourself with plastic, and what you saw was just little bits in front of you. But I remember that Withers could play in the wet. The Tasmanians liked that day very much. But all through this anyway, talking about the weather and the wet weather, cricket. I mean, 59 in England, but you were playing cricket alongside your football through all the times we're talking about?
Well, I had a head start to cricket. I mean, at 15 years of age, I was playing first-grade cricket. Now, I'm not saying I was a first-grade cricketer, but Midland Guildford were threatened with extinction from the league because they had an old side who couldn't beat anybody and they were going nowhere. And the WACA said, either you lift your game or we're going to replace you. And so, in their wisdom, as far as I was concerned, the Midland Guildford Cricket Club retained about 3 of their senior players and then brought all their promising young people up into the first-grade side from under 16s. And at 15 years of age, I was playing first grade for Midland Guildford. Now, you know, getting your name in the paper every week, and it was a big deal.
Sure.
And you start to give yourself a chance. I mean, I remember my first game of first grade cricket. I was league before wicket bowled Padbury against Nedlands for 23. That's a pretty good score, 23 for me, and I thought I owned Midland. It was a bad decision too. You know.
Of course, of course.
But I had a head start into the cricket, so 5 years before I started playing league football, I had 5 years of cricket experience under my belt at that stage.
Well, let's spin it on to 58 because you picked to play for Australia.
Yes. Yes.
That was the pinnacle. I mean, and we talked about it before. I mean, had you become a regular cricketer then, there would have been no decision to make. I mean, a regular in the Test team.
Oh, no. I would have played cricket for sure and certain. Yeah, it was quite incredible. I started with Midland Guildford as a batsman, and I bowled a few off-spinners. Our opening bowler didn't turn up at the WACA one day. That was Norm Beatty, who was a Swans footballer also. And we used to train at cricket after training was finished. We always stayed back, and that's when we thought we had our real training. And we were Lindwall 1 minute and McCool the next minute. And I was always Lindwall, trying to emulate this magnificent bowling action of Ray Lindwall. And anyway, Pat McCarthy, our captain, said, well, you'll have to open the bowling, you better bowl some Lindwalls. And I became an opening bowler. Well, a season later, I was picked in the state side as an opening bowler. And then sort of reverted back to off-spin again because there wasn't another off-spinner in Australia. And the tour of England was coming up, and I knew Australia needed an off-spinner, so I started to bowl both and concentrate on off-spinners, and I still had a bit of batting there. So I didn't take a lot of wickets. I was in the state side, I used to have to bowl within 3 runs per over. That was my job.
So containment.
Into the breeze, and so I bowled more overs in my era than any other bowler because I was bowling up into the breeze and trying to bowl inside 3 and over, and we would attack from the other end with Gaunt and Hoare and all those guys. So my averages never looked all that good, but I did bowl well on Eastern States wickets. I remember in Brisbane, prior to being picked in the Test, I bowled 40 overs, took 4 for 97. I mean, to bowl 48 ball overs in a one innings, that's a lot of overs. And I had similar figures, not as many overs in Melbourne and Sydney, and I bowled well. And the Australian selectors, they didn't actually go on my performance, they went on what they'd seen me do. So I was selected right out of the blue. Although, having said that, I played in Sydney that year before the Test team was selected. And when I was leaving Sydney Cricket Ground, Ian Craig said, see you in a couple of weeks.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, I won't be back in a couple of weeks. What's he talking about?
These New South Welshmen are in the know, aren't they?
Oh, well, he was captain.
Oh, yes.
About that
very
stage,
young captain too.
So what he knew was that I was in line to be picked to play in the Test side. And
so you make the Test side, and I mean, it was a fairy tale beginning for you, wasn't it? Your first sort of few spells.
Well, I was like a fish out of water. I mean, I met Neil Harvey for the first time. The first Test I'd ever seen I played in. So I didn't know half my teammates. And I think there was some rain interference. I think I came on before tea and bowled an over and a half of medium pace off a long run, first or second change. And then Benno said, why don't we bowl some off-spinners? And I was going to do whatever he said.
Of course.
And then I went to tea with 2 for 5.
And who were the 2? Come on.
May and Dexter.
You can't do better than that.
And I can always remember walking off the Sydney Cricket Ground and walking through the members, and they're all trying to get a look at this guy who's got 2 for 5.
Yeah.
And after tea, I was bowling again, and the first ball after tea, Roy Sweatman, their wicketkeeper, had come in, and Alan Davidson would normally always field at leg slip, and they called him the Claw. He was just a magnificent catcher in close. Colin McDonald happened to be there. The first ball after tea, Sweatman nicked it straight to leg slip, and Colin McDonald dropped it. That would have been 3 for 5. It might have been hard to leave me out with 3 for 5.
Yes, yes.
But it didn't really go on from there. But
did you expect to go on the next tour? I mean, did you expect to go to England?
Yes, very much so. I mean, that's the greatest disappointment of my whole life. because I was in every Eastern States newspaper, and I had friends over there that used to send the papers, and Frank Worrell, Bill O'Reilly, didn't matter who was writing.
This is before email.
Yeah. This is, you know, in the newspapers over there, everyone tipped me as a certainty to go on the 61 tour of England.
Now, I believe the explanation came some years later from the Don.
Yes, it did. Well, I was sitting in my office, and Ken Muleman rang me at 8 o'clock in the morning and offered his commiserations that I hadn't been selected. And that, I remember I sat for 2 hours in my office, just anchored to the chair, never moved, just sat there. And that was at a time, Dennis, when it was a thrill to go to the Eastern States, let alone go to England. And that hurt. And so I wrote Sir Donald Bradman a pretty strong letter, because that year, the year leading up to the 60-61 season, Bob Simpson and Ron Gaunt, for the first time I'd worked hard in the off-season. Every Wednesday and Sunday, rain, hail or shine, we went to the nets and we batted and bowled.
Because Simpson had made his debut in '58 as well, the same series, hadn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And we all had great seasons in the 60-61 season. I mean, I had 33 wickets in the Shield games, bowling off spinners in Australia. That was almost unheard of.
And at the WACA, tough.
Yeah, out at the WACA, yeah. And Bob Simpson and Ron Gaunt both had very good seasons. Anyway, I wrote to Sir Donald Bradman, and I'll give him his due, Dennis. He wrote back. He wrote 3 full-scap pages back to me, explaining that the International Cricket Council had asked every cricketing nation not to pick anyone in their side that had anything like a doubtful action.
So this was coming after Metcalfe and O'Rourke.
Metcalfe, Rourke, Hitchcock, Guthrie in South Australia, Jim Burke. I mean, it was Tony Locke was caught up in it, of course. And
yes,
several other players, a fellow named Rhodes from South Africa, and it was happening all around the world. So, and really, it was pretty smart by the International Cricket Council just to ask every nation not to pick anyone with a doubtful action.
But you were caught right in the middle of this,
right
in the
middle
of the sandwich.
Yeah, even though I'd played in England in 1959 and bowled lots of overs, and the first game I played in England, I played for Hayward against a side called Middleton, and every television station in England were at the ground. I was the first Australian chucker. That was the headline I got when I arrived in England. First Australian chucker in England. And at the ground I played in, at Middleton's ground, there was every television station in England was there. And when I ran into bowl that day, I could hear all the cameras start up. And I took 6 for 30 my first game. And
but the stories weren't about that.
But the big headline in the Manchester Evening News was Slater clear as a spinner. Oh. So I got the all clear. So the Bradman thing was a bit disappointing. He sent me 36 transparencies over.
Of your action?
6 of me, 6 of Miller, 6 of Laker, 6 of Illingworth, all guys with perfect actions compared to mine. And then lo and behold, the next year when I was playing for West Australia and I arrived in Adelaide, Sir Donald was at the airport to meet me. And others, I would think, but it was unusual for the chairman of Australian selectors to be at the airport to meet a team. And he invited me to his home on the Monday evening for a meal, which I duly attended. And we had a lovely meal with Lady Bradman and Sir Donald Bradman, and his daughter was there, and his son turned up. And we had a nice meal, and then he got his manual projector out. He had a manual projector.
Right.
It was just the wine.
Yep.
And he would throw it onto the wall, and after about half an hour of that, I felt like crawling under the chair because my action wasn't good. But having said that, by the end of the night, I felt a bit better because I found that he could stop this manual projector any time he wanted to.
So anybody's action could...
And he caught some very high-profile players out, you know. So he got them in very compromising positions with their bowling actions. And I remember Sonny Ramadan had the worst of all. I mean, he used to bowl with his sleeves buttoned down. But it was a highlight, really. I mean, be invited to Sir Donald Bradman's home and to just see how he really operated. So my letter didn't fall on deaf ears. I can't criticise him. I mean, he did everything he had to do to answer my letter.
Well, looking back, maybe apart from your action, is there much you'd change about your days in sport, football and cricket?
Well, I wish there'd been a bit more coaching. There was no coaching for bowling when I played cricket. There was a fair bit of coaching for batting. And I remember I got I had a very good bowling action, but I got a jarred heel playing football, which meant I started the next cricket season by I couldn't put my heel on the ground, and I was a fast bowler trying to get in the state side. And so I started to put my pad of my foot on the ground and bending my front knee, and I got into that habit and never got out of it. So, but apart from that, Dennis, I've just had a wonderful time playing sport. I mean, I was going over east twice a year when no one went over east, and I got the odd trip to England to play a bit of league cricket. And but the people I met, I mean, you know, I was very close friends with Jack Clark before he died, and Jeff Christian, and I'm still close friends with Polly, and you know, we had some battles on the field. I was a very close friend of Blue Foley's. We used to see each other a lot, and Barry Cable. I mean, we are now good friends, and without me playing sport, I wouldn't have enjoyed that friendship.
And the media has just been a nice way to sort of stay in touch in more recent times?
Yes, I loved my media involvement, especially broadcasting the cricket. I miss that. I miss my involvement in the cricket right now, and yeah, I was always a bit bitter towards the ABC when they decided that I wouldn't do it anymore, because I enjoyed it, and I suppose I put more into that than any other area of the media. So it's yeah, that was disappointing, but
they were great days down at the WACA too, weren't they?
Nothing's forever, Dennis.
That's right. Oh, that's right. But the cups of tea, and we'd bring the cake. Ah, we better not reminisce anymore, Spud. I mean, that's something else again. But it's been terrific talking with you anyway, looking back and talking about those times.
Well, I feel privileged that you and the league have seen fit to interview me, because I was one of the lesser lights, I suppose, in the football scene.
No, I think the past 70 minutes proves that's anything but the case. Keith Slater.